What if I told you that beautiful-looking submerged tree, that classic rocky point you've been fishing for 20 years, is completely worthless right now? It sounds crazy, I know. But today, we are going to talk about structure in the early spring, and why your entire understanding of it could be fundamentally wrong. By the end of this video, you'll see why the most successful anglers are ignoring what everyone else is fishing. The key isn't in what you see on the bank, but in something far more subtle that most people drive right over with their boats. The truth is, the reason so many of us struggle during this time of year is because we're playing by the wrong rules. Honestly, have you ever pulled up to a textbook spot in March and just felt like you were fishing in a desert? Let me know in the comments. From the first day we pick up a fishing rod, the gospel is hammered into our heads. Find structure, find fish. Every magazine article, every Saturday morning TV show, every old-timer at the boat ramp says the same thing. Look for the laydowns, the rock piles, the points, the docks. And over the years it becomes muscle memory. You see a submerged tree, you cast to it. You see a rocky point, you work it over from every angle. It's an automatic pilot approach to fishing. And let's be clear, most of the year, this works. It's solid advice. But early spring is a different beast entirely. When that water is still bone-chillingly cold, this automatic approach becomes a trap. It leads you to fish memories instead of reality, and it's the #1 reason for empty live wells when the fish are just starting to wake up. First things first, let's talk about how the classic definition of structure is a trap. When you hear the word structure, what do you picture? It's probably a laydown tree, a stump field, a brush pile, or a big rock. Technically, most of that is cover. But as fishermen, we tend to lump it all together. We see an object in the water, and we call it structure. This becomes the first mistake in early spring. We spend all our time looking for these obvious, visible objects. We feel productive because we're casting to a clear target. You can imagine a fish sitting right there. The problem is, in 40-degree water, the fish you're imagining probably isn't there. We're so focused on the object that we completely miss the bigger, more important picture of what's actually going on. So let's establish the real definition of structure for early spring. I want you to erase the image of a tree or a rock pile from your mind for a second. From now on, think of structure as any change or irregularity in the lake's bottom. It's not about the thing itself, it's about the difference. That's the key word. A 1-foot change in depth on a massive flat is structure. A 10-foot wide patch of gravel in a giant mud bottom is structure. The almost invisible line where a clay bank turns to sand is structure. These are the things that concentrate fish when they aren't relating to obvious physical objects. It requires you to slow down and pay attention to your electronics, or even the feel of your lure, instead of just what you can see with your eyes. It's a totally different way of looking at the water. This leads to the big question. Why do bass ignore that obvious, beautiful cover in the early spring? It seems counterintuitive. In cold water, bass are lethargic. Their metabolism is slow, and they're all about conserving energy. They aren't actively roaming and aggressively ambushing prey from behind a stump like they will in a few months. Their world is small, and it revolves around two things: finding the most stable, comfortable water temperature, and finding an easy meal. That beautiful visible log is often located in colder, deeper water, or in a shaded area. It offers an ambush point, yes, but bass aren't in ambush mode yet. They are in survival and warming mode. They will sacrifice a great-looking hiding spot for a spot that's just 1 or 2 degrees warmer. And we 100% need to exploit that. This brings us to the single most important factor in early spring location: the sun. The sun is the engine that jump-starts the entire ecosystem. It dictates everything. Bass are cold-blooded, which means they are absolute slaves to water temperature. A change of just 1 or 2 degrees can be the difference between a dead zone and a spot that's loaded with every bass in the area. We often think about temperature on a grand scale, like the overall lake temperature. But you need to think about it on a micro scale. That little shallow pocket on the north side of the lake is getting baked by the sun all afternoon, while the south side is still in the shade. The water in that pocket could be 5 degrees warmer than the main lake. That is a massive, massive difference to a cold-blooded creature. So, it's time to make a mental shift. I want you to stop thinking ambush point and start thinking heat sponge. The best structure in the early spring is anything that absorbs and retains solar energy. What materials do that best? Dark objects and dense objects, dark mud bottoms, rocks, concrete, and riprap. These things act like solar panels. They soak up the sun's rays and radiate that heat back into the surrounding water, creating a small zone of comfort. Think about it on land. On a cool spring day, an asphalt parking lot is much warmer to the touch than the grass next to it. It's the exact same principle under the water. That old discarded tire someone illegally dumped in the lake might be a better fishing spot than a beautiful 100-year-old oak tree that fell in the water. It's ugly, but it holds heat. Let's talk about one of the most overlooked forms of structure, the subtle bottom change. Picture this scenario. You're idling across a huge, seemingly barren-looking flat on your fish finder. It all looks the same. 10 feet of water, a flat bottom, nothing. You're about to speed up and head to the next spot. But wait. If you look closely at your sonar return, you notice that for about 20 feet, the line on the screen gets a little thicker, a little brighter. That's it. That's the spot. That subtle change indicates a transition from a soft, muddy bottom to a harder sand or gravel bottom. That's the structure. That hard spot will hold a little more heat and attract crawfish and baitfish. And that's all it takes to concentrate a school of prespawn bass. Here's a comparison that might seem odd. Why a ditch is often better than a dock in early spring. We are programmed to fish docks. They provide shade and cover. But what do we know about early spring? Shade is the enemy of warmth. A dock casts a shadow, cooling the water beneath it. That's great in the summer, but it's a negative right now. Now consider a subtle, featureless ditch or depression on a big sun-facing flat. It might only be a foot or two deeper than the surrounding area, but it's a travel route. More importantly, that entire flat, including the ditch, is getting bathed in sunlight all day long. The base can use that ditch as a highway while staying in the warmest water available. They get security from the depth change and warmth from the sun. It's the best of both worlds. This brings me to what I call the nothing bank myth. We have all seen them, and we have all driven right past them. It's that long, straight, boring-looking shoreline with seemingly nothing on it. No laydowns, no docks, no rocks, no points. It just looks completely unproductive. And so, 99% of anglers ignore it completely. They'll race past it to get to the next good-looking spot. But these nothing banks are often where you find the most important and most subtle transitions that we've been talking about. Because there are no obvious visual targets, it forces you to rely on your electronics and your feel to find those little zones where the bottom composition changes. These are the places that hold unpressured fish. So, how do you find these spots on a nothing bank? You start looking for the seams. Think of it like the seams on a piece of clothing. Underwater, you have seams where two different bottom types meet. The line where a soft, mucky bottom transitions to a hard-packed sand bottom, or the edge where a gravel bottom meets a clay bottom. These seams are invisible highways for everything that lives down there. Crawfish will burrow in these transition zones. Baitfish relate to them, and you can bet the bass will be there too, using them as their own personal buffet line. This is the edge you truly need to be fishing in the spring, not just the edge of a weed line. Your electronics are your best friend for finding these seams. You need to learn how to interpret the difference between a hard bottom and a soft bottom on your sonar. A hard bottom like rock, gravel, or packed clay, will typically return a thick, bright yellow line on most modern fish finders. A soft bottom, like deep mud or silt, will return a much thinner, weaker line, often in blue or red. The magic happens right on the line where that bright yellow meets the weaker color. That is your target. Imagine you're walking barefoot from a paved road onto a muddy field. You can feel that change instantly. That's what you're looking for underwater. Dragging a heavy jig or a Carolina rig can also tell you the same thing. You'll feel it go from smooth and mushy to scratchy and rough. With this new mindset, it's time to reevaluate classic spots like points. We all know that points are fish magnets, but not all points are created equal, especially in the early spring. It's not the point itself that's magical. It's what the point is made of and how it lays out. A long tapering point that is all sand and drops into deeper sand is far less valuable right now than a similar point where a rock bottom transitions to a sand bottom halfway down the point. It's not just about the change in depth, it's about the change in composition. The best points will have a hard bottom on the sun-facing side. That's the spot on the spot. Don't just fish the point, fish the most valuable part of the point. Here is another little secret: the inside turn of a channel. When you look at a map of a creek or river channel, you see it winding its way through a flat. Most anglers will instinctively go to the outside bend of that channel. That's where the current has dug out the deepest water, and it's a classic textbook spot. And it's a great spot for much of the year. But in the early spring, take a look at the opposite side, the inside turn. The inside turn is almost always shallower, flatter, and has a softer bottom. It's also more protected from the current and gets more direct perpendicular sunlight. It's a natural warming station and resting area for fish that are moving up from the deep channel. Everyone else is fishing the outside bend. You should be quietly picking apart the inside turn. And please, do not forget about man-made structure. We're talking about riprap banks along bridges and dams, concrete boat ramps, old submerged roadbeds, and bridge pilings. These things are giant heat conductors. They are made of rock and concrete, which absorb solar energy far more efficiently than the surrounding natural bottom. Think about a brick wall on your house. On a cool sunny day, you can put your hand on it and feel the warmth. That is exactly what is happening underwater. The water right up against that riprap can be several degrees warmer. That's why you so often see baitfish flickering around bridges in the spring. They know where the warm water is, and the bass are never far behind. Let's also talk about the wind's deceptive role. The classic fishing advice is to always fish the wind-blown banks. The wind pushes the plankton, which attracts the baitfish, which attracts the bass. And again, this is fantastic advice for much of the year. But in the early spring, when water temperatures are in the low 40s, that wind can be a negative. A strong cold spring wind can actually chill the water on a wind-blown bank. Sometimes, the better option is to look for a calm, protected pocket or cove that is completely out of the wind, but is getting direct sunlight. That calm water will warm up much faster and create a more stable environment for lethargic bass. You have to play the conditions of the day. Another subtle piece of structure you should be looking for is a watercolor clue. This is especially true after a spring rain. You'll often have muddy runoff coming into the lake from feeder creeks. As that muddy water mixes with the main body of water, it creates a distinct edge or mud line. You can see it with your own eyes. The transition from muddy water to clearer water is a form of structure. That muddy water is often slightly warmer and filled with nutrients. Baitfish will stack up right on that edge, using the muddy water for cover while feeding in the clearer water. For bass, it's a perfect ambush situation. They can sit in the dirty water and attack anything that swims by in the clear water. Always fish these seams. Let's put this all together in a real-world scenario. Imagine it's a sunny but cool morning in late March. You pull up to a northern-facing bank. It's still in the shade from the morning sun. It's got 5 great-looking lay-down trees and a beautiful rock bluff. It looks perfect, but it's probably empty because it's cold. Now you motor across the lake to a featureless, southern-facing bank. It's been getting baked by the sun for 3 hours. It looks incredibly boring. But you use your electronics and find a small 20-yard stretch where the bottom is a little harder than the surrounding mud. That is your honey hole. You've combined the 2 most important factors, sun exposure and a hard bottom. That's where you'll get bit. You have to start thinking of your lure as a research tool, not just a fish catcher. When you're fishing these subtle spots, your bait is constantly giving you information. Pay attention to it. When you're slowly dragging a Carolina rig, a football jig, or even a crankbait along the bottom, feel what it's telling you. Can you feel it go from a soft, mushy feeling to a scratchy, ticking feeling? When that happens, you've just crossed one of those bottom composition seams. You just found the structure. Don't just reel in and cast to another spot. Stop and pick that little area apart. Make multiple casts to it from different angles. You've done the hard work of finding the spot. Now it's time to cash in. We also need to understand that this kind of structure isn't always deep. We're often conditioned to look for fish in deeper water in the cold. But in the early spring, some of the warmest water in the entire lake can be in 2 or 3 feet of water on a dark-bottomed northern flat. The structure in a spot like this might simply be a tiny depression that's only 6 inches deeper than everything around it. Or it might be a single big rock sitting on the flat. From a boat, it all looks the same, but to a bass, that tiny little irregularity is a landmark. It's a place to set up and wait for the sun to do its work. Never overlook the super shallow water if it's getting a lot of sun. This new approach requires you to rethink how you look at your lake maps. When you're studying your digital contour maps, I want you to stop looking for just the most obvious sharp drop-offs and giant underwater humps. Everyone sees those. Instead, start training your eyes to find the more subtle features. Look for those big, boring-looking flats, and then zoom in. Do you see a small channel or ditch that swings through it? Do you see a slightly tighter group of contour lines that indicates a small rise? These are the high-percentage spots that other anglers scroll right past. They don't look impressive on a map, but combined with the right sun exposure and bottom content, they are absolute gold mines. Ultimately, this is all about a mental shift. This is the biggest takeaway from this entire video. You must stop thinking of structure only as an object. You need to start looking for a change in depth, a change in temperature, a change in bottom composition, a change in watercolor. That is the true effective definition of structure in the early spring. When you make this mental shift, it's like a light bulb goes off. You'll start to see the lake in a completely different way. It separates the anglers who consistently catch fish during this tough period from the ones who keep going back to the same old community holes and wondering why they're not getting bit. So, let's bring it all home. For years, we've been conditioned to think of structure as a noun, a thing, an object, a log, a rock pile, a dock. But in the early spring, you have to start thinking of structure as a verb, a transition, a change. The game-changing aha moment is when you finally realize that the ugliest, most boring-looking bank on the entire lake might be the single best spot, simply because it has a small patch of gravel bottom that's been getting direct sun all day. You're no longer fishing for what looks good to your human eyes. You're fishing for what feels good to the base. This mindset completely frees you from the pressure of fishing the same community holes as everyone else. It opens up 90% of the lake that other anglers ignore because it doesn't look fishy. You'll start seeing potential where everyone else sees nothing. Thank you so much for watching. If this video gave you a new perspective, do me a favor and hit that like button. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now I have a question for you. What's the most overlooked type of structure on the lakes you fish? Is it bottom composition, a subtle ditch, or something else entirely? I really want to hear about it in the comments. Let's all learn from each other.